How do you feel when you realize that you almost ruined the birthday party of a 4-year-old girl? And what if I told you that this is just part of a story that changed everything? I was supposed to be at John's place that day. It had been a while since we last talked, and I knew he was making an effort to reach out. We used to be close, practically family. Grew up together, shared everything. But life drifted us apart, mostly because of me. I started making good money as a financial advisor, something I worked hard for. But the success came with stress, and I found myself caught up with a crowd that knew how to party a little too well. Weekends turned into hazy routines. A few drinks, some stuff to keep me going, and the occasional something extra to help me relax. John tried to be a close friend to me, calling me up, inviting me over to his house. He had a daughter now. I was supposed to be a part of her life, too. But I kept pulling away, always finding an excuse not to show up. Maybe I thought my life was moving too fast for his, or maybe it was the other way around. But he sent me a message about his daughter's birthday. I figured it was his way of trying to patch things up. She was turning 4, and I remembered him telling me the day she was born. I should have been there for her, like I promised. I was already with some friends when my phone reminded me about the party. I was about to head out when someone handed me a bottle of something new. They said it was meant to help you relax, something you took by mouth. I tried it, but nothing happened, so I brushed it off. I ordered a ride to John's place since I didn't want to drive if whatever I'd taken decided to kick in. Everything felt fine on the way over. The air was crisp, the music playing in the car was just background noise. But as soon as I stepped out of the car and started walking up his driveway, something changed. It hit me like a wall. My legs felt heavy, like I was dragging them through mud. Everything around me seemed sharper, brighter. The leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant laughter of kids, the faint smell of food from the backyard grill, it all hit me at once. It should have been comforting, but it was overwhelming. I made it through the door, mumbling some kind of greeting to John's wife when she answered. She looked surprised to see me, but not unfriendly. Just that polite kind of surprise you get when you aren't sure if someone's showing up or not. I looked around for John but didn't see him right away. Everything was taking longer to process. My hands felt weird, like they were moving slower than they should. My throat was dry, and my chest had that hollow feeling, like I was floating just outside of myself. I barely made it to the bathroom. Locked the door behind me and braced myself against the sink, trying to get a grip. My reflection looked off. My skin was pale, eyes glassy. I splashed cold water on my face, but it only made things worse. I sat down on the toilet, just trying to steady myself. But the calm I was chasing wasn't there. Instead, everything felt heavier. My shoulders slumped, my head dropped forward, and I lost track of time. There was a knock at the door. John's wife, her voice muffled but polite, asking if I was all right. I wanted to answer right away, but my tongue felt like it was made of stone. I managed a slurred, "Yeah, I'm fine," but it didn't sound right. It was like my body was sinking into itself, but my mind was stuck replaying the same thought over and over. I should have just stayed home. It took everything I had to push myself up off the toilet and stumble toward the door. My legs felt shaky, like they could give out any second. When I finally managed to unlock the door and pull it open, the look on her face said everything. Shock, confusion, and something else, maybe worry. I wasn't sure, but I could barely keep my eyes focused. I mumbled something about feeling off and tried to make my way back to the living room. The sounds were all distorted, voices blending together in a low, buzzing hum. I was trying so hard to act normal, to make it seem like I had it together. But every step felt heavier than the last. And that's when I noticed everyone staring. I couldn't figure out why they were all looking at me like that. Faces frozen mid-conversation, eyes wide and brows drawn tight. Even the kids had gone quiet. The only sound left was some kid's cartoon song playing on a loop in the background. John was standing near the kitchen, his expression shifting from surprise to something closer to disbelief. Like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "Hey, man, you good?" he asked, his voice cutting through the haze. I tried to answer, but the words got stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth. That's when I noticed the chill. Cold air hitting my skin where it shouldn't have. I looked down. My shirt was wrinkled and halfway untucked, but worse than that, I hadn't pulled my pants up. I was just standing there, exposed and oblivious, surrounded by kids and parents who were all staring like they'd just witnessed something out of a nightmare. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Panic surged through my chest, snapping me out of whatever daze I'd been in. My hands fumbled to fix myself, every movement clumsy and slow. Someone gasped. A kid screamed. And in that moment, the only thing I could think to do was cover up and get out of there. I tried to mumble an apology, but it came out as a mess of half-formed words. John was already moving toward me, his face twisted with something between anger and pity. I'd never seen him look at me like that before. He grabbed me by the arm, his grip firm but not rough. "You need to go," he said, his voice low and controlled, like he was trying to hold something back. I didn't fight him. Just let him steer me toward the door while everyone else kept their distance. All those eyes still locked on me, still judging, still horrified. John didn't say anything as he walked me outside. Just opened the front door and practically pushed me through it. "Wait here," he said, disappearing back inside before I could even respond. The air outside was cool, but it did nothing to clear my head. My legs felt like they were made of sand, unsteady and unreliable. When John came back out, he had his keys in hand. "I'm taking you home," he said, his voice flat. I tried to protest, to say I could just call a ride, but he wasn't listening. Just unlocked his car and motioned for me to get in. I didn't argue. The drive felt endless, stretched thin by the heaviness hanging between us. There was no comfort in the quiet. It wasn't the familiar kind they used to share during late-night drives through town, windows down and music thumping. This was the kind that buried words and turned the air stale. John's hands gripped the steering wheel with a tension that made his knuckles stand out, pale against the dim interior. His jaw shifted and tightened, the muscles working like he was chewing through thoughts he didn't want to say aloud. But the silence did enough talking on its own. Everything about him in that moment felt closed off. Even his breathing was controlled, shallow and steady, like he was keeping something volatile locked inside. I wanted to say something, to explain or apologize or just give him a reason to believe I wasn't beyond saving. But the words stayed stuck, lost somewhere in the haze of guilt and shame. What I'd done couldn't be undone. It couldn't be taken back or smoothed over with the right combination of explanations or apologies. I had crossed a line, and no amount of reasoning could erase the damage left behind. Nothing was said during the drive. It didn't need to be. The silence had already spoken more than enough. The house felt colder than usual when I stumbled inside, the quiet pressing down like a weight. John hadn't bothered waiting around after dropping me off. His car had barely slowed before I opened the door and stepped out, his gaze fixed on the road ahead like the sight of me was something he couldn't stomach any longer. I made it to the couch and collapsed there, the room spinning in slow, nauseating circles. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards as I shifted my weight, the steady, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. Everything from the party replayed itself on a loop, each memory sharper and more painful than the last. The looks on their faces. The absolute disgust. John's voice, low and strained, like he was fighting to keep from shouting. His frustration felt raw, his patience stretched so thin it was a wonder it hadn't snapped altogether. He'd done everything he could to make me feel welcome again, to give me a way back into his life. And I had thrown it all away in a single careless moment. John had made his decision. That much was clear from the way he hadn't even looked at me when I left his car. He had given me one last shot at being part of something real, and I had ruined it. There was nothing left to do but face what I had done. And the worst part was knowing that John was right to be angry. That his disappointment was justified, that his frustration was something I had brought on myself. Every thought circled back to the same hollow conclusion. The damage was done, and I had no idea how to make things right. The days blurred together after that. I drifted through them with the same heaviness clinging to me, dragging me down every time I tried to push past it. Work was mechanical, my conversations shallow and forced. Nobody noticed the difference, or if they did, they kept their distance. Everything I tried to do to distract myself failed. Streaming mindless shows, scrolling through my phone, even going out with the same group of friends I'd been wasting my weekends with. It all felt hollow. Nothing stuck. My phone stayed silent. No messages from John, no attempt at some awkward reconciliation. He had washed his hands of me, and I couldn't blame him for it. That single realization stuck deeper than anything else. He had been my last real connection to something that mattered. And now, even that was gone. It took me a while to realize the phone calls from my friends had started to taper off. The invitations grew less frequent, the messages shorter and less genuine. They were pulling away, and for once, I didn't care enough to chase them. Days turned into weeks. John never reached out, and I knew better than to try making the first move. There was nothing left to say that would make any difference. I started avoiding anything that reminded me of him. No more social media, no more glancing at old photos or letting my thoughts drift toward the past. Cutting him out of my mind felt like the only way to keep myself from sinking any further. But the emptiness only grew. I spent the next few days cutting myself off from everything I'd used to escape. It was hell. The withdrawal, the headaches, the feeling of my own skin crawling. But somewhere in the mess of it all, a strange sort of determination took root. I needed to change something. Not to fix the past, but to at least have a chance at a future that wasn't just another series of wasted days. It didn't take long for the sleepless nights to pile up, each one leaving me more exhausted and irritable than the last. But underneath all the discomfort was something different, something that felt like clarity. I threw myself into work. It was the only thing that felt stable, something I could control. Early mornings, late nights, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to the mess I'd made of everything else. It wasn't much of a life, but at least it was something. A routine. And somewhere along the line, I started to rebuild the parts of myself I'd left behind. Weeks turned into months. I kept my head down, focused on rebuilding what little I had left. The haze was gone, replaced by a dull, grinding kind of determination. Nothing about it felt good, but it felt real. But there were days when the emptiness would creep back in, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, fingers twitching with the urge to call John, to try explaining myself, to beg for some kind of forgiveness. But the fear of rejection was stronger than the need for redemption. I had already pushed him away once. Trying to force my way back into his life would only make it worse. The guilt never went away. It just dulled over time, like an old scar. But there was something else there too, something that felt like progress. Every small step forward felt like a victory, even if nobody else would ever know about it. Months passed in a kind of numb, deliberate focus. Work became an obsession. It was easier to throw myself into something concrete, something that had clear rules and measurable results. Success in the office felt like the only proof that I could still be worth something, even if everything else had fallen apart. But no matter how many hours I buried myself in spreadsheets and meetings, the emptiness never fully left. It just settled deeper, turning into something cold and constant. I kept waiting for the urge to reach out to John to fade away. It didn't. If anything, the silence between us only made the weight of everything worse. But calling him was out of the question. Whatever apology I could offer would come off as hollow and desperate. He'd already made his decision, and I had no right to drag him back into the mess I'd made. John had been right to push me away. His disappointment, his frustration, it was all justified. And acknowledging that hurt worse than anything I'd experienced before. But it was also the only thing that felt real. Something broke inside me one night. I had been sifting through old photos on my laptop, mostly out of some misguided attempt to remind myself of better days. But every image felt like a mockery, a reminder of how far I had fallen. Scrolling through the memories, I stumbled across one I hadn't seen in years. It was from the day John's daughter was born. The two of us standing outside the hospital, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us grinning like idiots. That was the day I'd promised to be there for her, to be a part of her life, like some kind of extended family. But that promise had been nothing more than another lie I'd told myself. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. The guilt twisted itself into something sharp and ugly. But underneath it all was something else. Something that felt like resolve. Maybe John was done with me. Maybe the damage was too deep to ever be fixed. But if I kept going the way I was, nothing would ever change. The only way forward was through. Making changes felt like clawing my way up from the bottom of a deep, dark hole. Nothing about it was easy or clean. Most days felt like a losing battle, like dragging myself through mud only to end up stuck right where I started. But the smallest improvements felt huge. Getting up on time. Keeping my place clean. Showing up to work with something more than just numb determination. It all seemed so basic, so ordinary. But after everything I'd put myself through, it was more than I had managed in years. I started exercising again, just simple routines at first. The strain and burn of it felt like proof I could still push myself towards something better. The emptiness didn't go away, but it grew quieter. Work became more than just a way to fill the hours. I threw myself into every project, chasing goals I had ignored for too long. The effort paid off. Promotions, raises, recognition from people who had only known me as a shadow of what I used to be. But none of it felt real. No amount of success or praise could fill the void left by everything I had lost. It was just noise, drowning out the silence but never replacing it. That realization led me to the doorstep of a small, rundown building tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. A support group. Something I had never pictured myself walking into. let alone participating in. But the loneliness had grown too heavy to carry alone. The first few meetings were brutal. Sitting in a circle of strangers, listening to them talk about their own struggles, their own mistakes. It was like staring into a mirror I had spent years trying to avoid. But there was something else there too. A kind of acceptance that I had never allowed myself to feel. The understanding that everyone in that room had hit their own versions of rock bottom, and they were all trying to climb their way out. It was the first time I had admitted to anyone, especially myself, just how badly I had screwed everything up, how much damage I had left in my wake. And as the weeks passed, something began to shift. The weight of it all didn't go away, but it grew lighter. The anger I had been directing at myself started to feel less like punishment and more like a reason to change. Months turned into a year. Progress came in fits and starts, never as smooth or straightforward as I wanted it to be. I'd make strides only to stumble, slipping back into old habits of isolation and self-doubt. But each time, I found it a little easier to pick myself back up. The support group became something I actually looked forward to. Faces that had once been strangers now felt like a kind of reluctant family. People who understood the struggle of trying to rebuild something you destroyed yourself. Talking about what happened with John was still difficult. I skirted around the details at first, giving vague summaries that felt safe. But eventually, the truth came out, piece by piece. Admitting what I had done wasn't about looking for forgiveness. It was about acknowledging reality, no matter how much it hurt. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Days when the urge to retreat back into old habits came creeping back, whispering promises of numbness and escape. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. Work remained steady. Promotions and raises came as I kept proving myself. My focus had sharpened into something almost mechanical, driven by the need to prove that I could be better, that I wasn't the same person who had made such a mess of everything. The idea of reaching out to John stayed lodged in the back of my mind, a constant, nagging presence I couldn't quite ignore. But every time I considered it, the fear of rejection flared up like an old wound. He had made his choice. I had to respect that. But then, something changed. It was a late afternoon, the sky bruised with the fading colors of twilight. I was sorting through old files at work when my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it, too focused on whatever pointless task I had buried myself in. But something made me check. And there it was, a message from John. Just a few words, typed out in that plain, unassuming way that always made his messages feel more genuine than anyone else's. A simple request to meet up. Nothing more, nothing less. My hands shook as I read it. And then again, and again, like I couldn't quite believe the words were real. The fear was still there, coiled tight and cold in my chest. But underneath it was something else, something that felt like hope. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The rush of emotions left me frozen, unable to process what this could mean. But one thing was certain, ignoring him wasn't an option. Not this time. I stared at the message for longer than I wanted to admit. The words were simple, almost too casual given everything that had happened. Just a request to meet up, like he was reaching out after a few months of drifting apart instead of over a year of near-total silence. Every fear I'd been carrying around came surging back. The thought of facing him, of seeing that disappointment in his eyes all over again, felt like more than I could handle. But ignoring him would be worse. Part of me wondered if this was just his way of closing the door for good. Maybe he wanted to clear the air, make sure I understood that whatever friendship we'd once had was over. Or maybe he just wanted to hear me acknowledge how badly I'd screwed up. Whatever his reasons, I couldn't let the chance slip by. Not after everything I'd been trying to rebuild. I typed out a response and deleted it more times than I could count. Each attempt sounded either too desperate or too detached. In the end, I settled for something neutral, agreeing to meet up and suggesting a time and place. The wait for his reply was agony. Minutes felt like hours, and I kept catching myself reaching for my phone, as if staring at the screen would somehow make his response come faster. But he replied. Just a short confirmation that he'd be there. The day of the meeting felt like dragging myself through sand. I kept imagining all the worst-case scenarios, playing them over in my head until they felt inevitable. Even the drive to the cafe felt surreal. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, my chest tight with a mix of fear and guilt that left me feeling lightheaded. I arrived early, half out of anxiety and half because I couldn't stand the thought of making him wait. The place was quiet, a small corner spot with worn wooden tables and soft music drifting from speakers hidden somewhere in the walls. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, my hands wrapped around the mug more for something to do than any real desire to drink it. The minutes crawled by, my mind flickering between 1,000 different thoughts. When he finally walked in, it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. There were new lines etched into his face, and something about his expression felt guarded. He spotted me and nodded, making his way over with the kind of measured calm that made my chest tighten. I couldn't read him, couldn't tell if this was going to be some kind of resolution or just another nail in the coffin. He sat down across from me, his gaze steady but distant. No handshake, no smile, just a polite acknowledgement that I was there. I waited for him to speak, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. Everything I'd rehearsed in my head felt pointless now, the words slipping away before I could even form them. He started talking, quietly, carefully, like he was trying to keep his emotions in check. He told me about everything I had missed. His daughter was older now, growing faster than he could keep up with. His work had been rough, but manageable. Things at home were steady, but not without their struggles. Hearing him talk about his life without me, and it was harder than I expected. Every detail felt like another reminder of what I had thrown away. But he kept talking, and I kept listening, even when the weight of it all started to feel unbearable. He never once mentioned that day at the party. Never brought up the disaster I had caused or the way he had been forced to clean up my mess. It was like he had placed it all in a box and locked it away, unwilling or unable to bring it into the conversation. Instead, he asked me how I'd been. The question was simple enough, but the way he asked it made it clear he wasn't just looking for a casual answer. He wanted to know. And for the first time, I told him the truth. The words came out tangled at first, stilted and awkward. I kept my eyes down, tracing the rim of my coffee cup like it held some kind of answer. Talking about everything I'd been through felt like peeling away layers of skin, each one leaving something raw and exposed. I told him about the downward spiral, how the need to numb everything had twisted itself into a habit that felt impossible to break. I explained how the haze had become a constant, blurring the line between days until nothing felt real. The more I talked, the easier it became. The words tumbled out, broken pieces of the truth I'd been hiding from for so long. I admitted how deep I'd sunk, how the guilt and shame had festered until it was all I could feel. He listened. Just listened. His expression stayed neutral, but I could tell he was paying attention to every word. It was the same way he used to listen when we were kids, back when I could tell him anything without worrying about judgment or rejection. But there was something else in his gaze now. Something cautious and distant, like he was holding back just enough to keep himself from getting hurt again. And I couldn't blame him for that. I kept talking, telling him about the decision to pull myself out of the mess I'd made. About the isolation, the nights spent fighting against old habits that never seemed to loosen their grip. The struggle to find something real in the wreckage I'd left behind. I talked about the support group, how admitting the truth out loud had been harder than anything else I'd done. How facing the damage I'd caused had left me feeling exposed and broken. But most of all, I admitted how much I regretted losing him. How the silence between us had felt like a punishment I couldn't outrun. The words were clumsy, awkward confessions that felt too little, too late. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't expect it. Whatever chance I'd had to fix things had been wasted long ago. All I wanted was for him to understand how much I regretted what I'd done. When I finally ran out of words, the silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. I kept my gaze down, bracing myself for whatever response he had to give. He took a long moment before speaking, his voice quieter than I remembered. He said he appreciated the honesty, that he could tell I was trying to change, even if he didn't know what that meant for us. He admitted that he had been angry, not just because of what happened at the party, but because of everything that had led up to it. The distance, the lies, the way I had shut him out without ever giving him a chance to help. Hearing him say that felt like being hit in the chest. The hurt in his voice was something I couldn't ignore. Something I had spent too long pretending wasn't real. But he wasn't finished. He admitted he had been holding on to his anger because it was easier than facing the hurt. That cutting me out had felt like the only way to protect himself and his family from whatever chaos I had become. It was like someone had taken everything I'd been dreading and laid it out on the table, plain and undeniable. And for once, I couldn't run from it. He told me he wasn't sure where things could go from here. That rebuilding trust would take time, if it was even possible at all. But he was willing to try, to at least see if there was something worth salvaging. The relief was overwhelming. It felt like air rushing back into lungs that had been starving for too long. But mixed in with that relief was something else, something like guilt, because I knew how undeserved that chance really was. He asked me how long I had been clean. The question was simple, but his tone made it clear he was asking for more than just a number. When I answered, his expression softened just a fraction. It was the closest thing to hope I'd seen from him since the moment he walked through the door. It wasn't forgiveness. Not even close. But it was a start. Rebuilding things with John was a slow, awkward dance. I built routines and kept them. Work was steady, even fulfilling. But what mattered most were those cautious conversations with John, each one chipping away at the distance between us. He'd invite me over, usually when his wife and daughter were out, testing the waters to see if I could be trusted. I understood why, and I respected his boundaries. Gradually, his wife softened. I could see the effort she made to be polite, even if she never quite looked me in the eyes. But politeness grew into tolerance, then something almost like acceptance. The breakthrough came on a gray, drizzling afternoon. John called and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. His wife and daughter would be there. It was an invitation I'd been waiting for but never dared to expect. The night was awkward at first. His wife kept her distance, her smiles tight and formal. His daughter glanced at me with cautious curiosity, more puzzled by my presence than anything else. But I stayed. And they let me. Dinner turned into conversation. Conversation turned into laughter, the kind that eased the tension even if only for a moment. It felt fragile, but it was real. I kept showing up. Dinner here, a casual hangout there. The walls between us slowly eroded, John's wife growing more comfortable, his daughter warming to me in the natural, innocent way kids do when they sense someone is trying their best. Then, the invitation that caught me off guard, a birthday party. His daughter's. A 2-year older than the last time I'd seen her, when I'd made an absolute disaster of everything. The party was loud and chaotic, kids running everywhere, parents mingling in the kitchen. It all felt overwhelming, like being thrown into a world I'd been exiled from and only just now allowed to re-enter. But John's wife welcomed me with something approaching warmth. His daughter handed me a piece of cake, beaming with the kind of effortless kindness only kids can manage. And John stood beside me, not watching me with suspicion but with something that felt like genuine trust. After the party wound down and most of the guests had left, John asked me to stick around. His wife stayed too, her expression no longer guarded but something closer to open. John spoke with a kind of seriousness I hadn't heard from him before. He admitted he hadn't completely forgiven me, that some things couldn't be erased, no matter how much effort I put into making things right. But he also acknowledged the work I had done to rebuild myself. What surprised me most was when his wife spoke. She said she had watched me try, had seen me put in the effort without expecting anything in return. That she appreciated how I had respected their boundaries, how I had been patient even when they hadn't made it easy. And then, John's daughter hugged me. Out of nowhere, her small arms wrapping around me like it was the most natural thing in the world. It left me stunned, overwhelmed by a gratitude I couldn't put into words. John's wife offered a real smile, tired but genuine. And John's hand on my shoulder felt like an acknowledgement that things were different now. Not perfect, not healed, but on their way. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years, peace. The journey wasn't over, but I wasn't making it alone. And maybe, for the first time, I was finally learning how to be part of something worth holding on to. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this. Remember, every new day is a chance to change your life, find a new path, and see everything in a new light.